The crisis in Syria is multiplying and growing in many countries from around the world. But how should this war end? We'll ask our guests next on the line. This is On the Line, and I'm Aisha Tanzim. Theoretically, the world may agree that the violence in Syria needs to end and soon, but practically, there's no consensus on how to go about it. We'll ask our guests about some of the conflicting regional or international interests at play here. Joining me in Washington is Dr. David Pollock. He's a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. And in our New York studios, we have Dr. Andranik Migranyan. He is the director of the Institute for Democracy and Cooperation. Welcome to On the Line. Dr. Pollock, in this war, what would be an ideal solution from a U.S. perspective? How should this war end?
Well, I think the first thing is that the violence should stop, and that the Syrian regime should stop massacring its own people, whether with chemical weapons or, and I think this is very important to emphasize, with any other kinds of weapons. Because although the focus right now is on the use by the Syrian regime of chemical weapons against its own people, the fact is that this regime has murdered tens of thousands of people with just conventional weapons, bullets and planes and tanks.
But if the violence stops, the violence stops and Bashar al-Assad is still the president, the U.S. will be okay with it?
I think the first step is to stop the violence. The next step after that is, as President Obama has been saying for the last 2 years, is for Bashar al-Assad to leave power.
Dr. Migranyan, everybody's talking about the day-to-day, but I want to ask you about the bigger picture. What would be an ideal solution for Russia in this war in Syria?
I think Russia's position is very clear and very consistent. Russia was in favor of negotiated settlement of the crisis, and Russia was the initiator of Geneva Conference on the settlement of the conflict over there, and Russia was in favor to participate all sides during this conference in order to find a kind of transitional body through which it was possible to form a new government over there. But unfortunately, Western partners of Russia, they took diametrically opposite position. They very strongly supported opposition. They didn't give the opposition any incentive to compromise with Bashar al-Assad, because President Obama and Western leaders said that preliminary condition for this kind of negotiated settlement must be that Bashar al-Assad has to step down. But as even Zbigniew Brzezinski said, why the hell he has to step down when he enjoyed support of overwhelming majority of the people over there? He enjoyed the support of his army and minorities, religious groups. Everybody wanted him to stay because the opposition, unfortunately, is now under the control of radical Islamists, and who is coming after the Assad? That's the problem.
Okay,
that's why Russia would like to know.
Let's find out what the West thinks about it. According to Dr. Migranyan, you heard him, wide support. Why should Assad leave?
Well, the main reason that he should leave is that he and his government have killed tens of thousands of their own people in cold blood. That's the main reason. And I completely disagree with our distinguished guest from New York about the extent of support that Assad has. If he has so much support, why does he have to mow down his own people with planes and tanks and missiles? It's absolutely absurd.
Dr. Migranyan, this is a good question. Usually presidents who have widespread support don't have to kill their own people.
Listen, I think that your distinguished guest over there either doesn't know the situation on the ground, or just he is also brainwashed by Western media, because tens of thousands of mercenaries and people are coming from different Arab countries to fight against Bashar al-Assad. And by the way, Only several days lasted Mubarak with his army, and the army organized coup against him. 2 years the fighting is going on, and still Assad is there, and still he enjoys the support of his army. Nobody is defecting him.
So
the problem is, unfortunately, the problem is that there is no proof that government used chemical weapons against its people. And second, what is the most important, Russia's position is that we are not got stuck with Assad. Assad can go, but we would like to know who is coming after Assad, because the choice is not between good and best, but between bad and worst.
He has a point here. What's the plan? If Assad leaves, we don't know who the rebels are. By some accounts, they're violent jihadists. Who's going to replace him?
Well, first of all, let me say I am delighted to hear our Russian guest say that Assad can go. And if so, I hope that Russia helps him go by stopping the support that they've been giving his government with weapons and diplomatic protection and media propaganda. But if you want to know who comes next after Assad, the answer is very simple. The opposition, for the most part, are not the crazy jihadis that our brainwashed guest, as he so kindly called me, referred to. In fact, the opposition in Syria are mostly people, ordinary Syrians, who just want freedom.
But isn't it
and
true that
there are jihadis in Syria, but they are a very small minority
Let me
of
ask
the
you
opposition.
this, though, because the U.S. government has been very hesitant in giving weapons to the rebels for exactly the same reason. They weren't really sure who the rebels were.
Well, I think personally that that's a mistake. I think that the U.S. government, I agree with you, that that has been U.S. government policy, but I don't agree with that policy. And I am perfectly free, as I'm not sure our guest in New York is, to disagree publicly with my own government's policy on this.
Now, Dr. Migranyan, on the flip side of this, the Arab League is also against Assad. How long is Russia willing to stand with him? How much more bloodshed can Russia take on the international level?
Oh, listen, this is not the problem of Russia. As I said, Russia is first against any outside interference in internal affairs of any country, against the regime change, because nothing good is coming out of this regime change. Look, you had Iran invasion of American troops of Iraq, and 200,000 killed, millions displaced. You had invasion on behalf of rebels in Libya, and countries in shambles. And then you got killed American diplomats, and practically Libya ceased to exist.
So,
you had disastrous policy in Egypt, and now you kicked out Mubarak. Now you released Mubarak, and Mubarak again is hero.
So, Dr.
You
Migranyan,
went through toppling the military dictatorship, and now you are coming to military dictatorship,
so,
because
Dr. Migranyan,
you ended
the
up
question is, the question here is, yes, I understand that there have been mistakes in the past. Some may be the U.S.'s fault, some maybe not. But the question is, do you then let a military dictator anywhere in the world do anything to their people? Do we as international community have no say in that?
Listen, Russia's position was very clear. Russia wanted a negotiated settlement, and Russia wanted representatives of Assad and all sides to participate in this process. But American administration didn't want, and practically opposition supported by them rejected this idea, because they wanted Americans to bombard Bashar al-Assad, to destroy his military infrastructure, and they want to take the power. That's why they are not ready to compromise. But, you know, this is not going to be a zero-sum game, because nobody knows who is the winner, because I don't trust, and nobody trusts these winners.
Okay, Dr. Pollock, did America make a mistake in saying Bashar al-Assad should go before they had a plan?
Well, I don't think it was a mistake to say he should go. I think it was a mistake to say that and then not do anything very much about it.
So again,
but American administration said Mubarak has to go, As a result, you got a Muslim Brotherhood, and now again another coup, and you have chaos, and chaos is increasing. Americans
that's a
are
different situation,
doing
though.
a disastrous policy in the region. Russia knows much better the region and is more cautious in its actions in the region.
Well, if Russia is so cautious in the region, why is Russia supporting the dictator in Damascus, Bashar al-Assad?
Bashar Assad is lesser evil at this moment.
So you are supporting Bashar al-Assad?
Between this cannibal and radical
you are
Islamist.
supporting this
Dr.
murderous
Migranyan,
dictator.
Let me ask these questions.
You
Dr.
do
Pollock.
support him.
Dr. Pollock, let me ask you this question. His argument, and let me rephrase it so we get something out of it.
Sure.
He's not saying, or according to him, Russia is not saying Bashar al-Assad is not bad. It's just that he's less bad than what may come after him.
Well,
what if
I don't understand. I don't understand.
So what
the
I'm
argument.
saying is, his argument is that other countries in the region where regime change happened are in shambles, and he mentioned Egypt, he mentioned Libya. Do you agree that other countries are in shambles?
Some are and some aren't, but in no other country do you have a government that has massacred tens of thousands of its own people. So all this talk about other countries is completely irrelevant. What's going on in Syria is an atrocity. And I don't understand why our guest at the beginning of his interview said Assad can go. And now he's saying, no, Russia supports Assad because he's better than any alternative. I think he really needs to make up his mind.
No, I think, let me clarify his position as I understood it, which is Assad can go if there is a replacement. What would be the replacement?
But he is also saying that there is no better replacement. And that's where I disagree completely with his position and with Russia's position. Because the replacement for Assad is the Syrian people. The Syrian people who have been not only demonstrating against the regime in the hundreds of thousands, but dying because of their desire to replace that bloody dictator.
Now, I want to come back to who these rebels are and who these Syrian people are who are demonstrating and whether they are a good replacement, but we have to take a short break here. Stay with us.
Voice of America. 1,500 hours
of news and information.
Educational and cultural programming to more than 134 million people
worldwide each week.
Listen to us on radio.
Watch us on television.
Follow us on Facebook or Twitter.
And through your mobile device.
VOA.
We're dynamic
and consistent
in bringing you
the most reliable information in 43 languages.
Tune in.
Tune in.
Welcome back to On the Line. I'm Aisha Tanzim. We're talking about the crisis in Syria and the involvement of other countries in it. Our guests are Dr. David Pollock, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and Dr. Andranik Migranyan, the director of the Institute for Democracy and Cooperation. Dr. Pollock, let me really grill you on it because this seems to be the crux of the problem. You're saying that the rebels are mostly ordinary Syrians.
Yes.
Now, they don't seem to be able to organize themselves. They've had conferences outside Syria. They had a leader who had to step down.
Right.
This doesn't look like somebody who's ready to govern.
Well, unfortunately, I think you're right. I don't think they are ready to govern. But I think the reason for that is that they've been hounded and harassed and murdered in cold blood by Assad's regime forces. If somebody can get the Syrian regime to stop shelling and bombing and gassing its own people, then the Syrian people would be able to organize an effective government.
Okay, before I go to Dr. Migranyan, tell me something. Would U.S. be willing to sit down for a negotiation if Assad stops bombing?
I think the U.S. has agreed previously to a negotiated discussion of the outcome in Syria in the Geneva conference format that our guest in New York has mentioned. But I'm not sure, frankly, today, after what the Assad regime has done in the last week, whether that offer is still on the table or not.
Dr. Migranyan, given that U.S., Europe, and other countries may be willing to sit down, how much pressure is Russia willing to put on Assad to end the violence?
Violence is on both sides. This is a civil war. That's why you can't blame only one side in all this bloodshed and mass killings. I am not on top of that. As I said, tens of thousands of people are coming from outside, from different places, the radical Islamists to fight, and to the jihadists who are fighting and who are the most militant part of these rebels. That's why Russia's position is clear. Again, negotiated settlement, participation of all sides, including Bashar al-Assad, and understanding who is coming after Bashar al-Assad. Not just leave the country in total chaos, because outcome will be even worse than now we have. And these killings could be just a joke comparing what could happen if Bashar al-Assad will step down.
Even though you're calling it a civil war, one side has an organized military while the other side is not. So the onus lies on Bashar al-Assad to reduce the violence and eventually end it.
Other side is getting enormous amount of armaments from Turkey, from Saudis, from Qatar, from all over the world. That's why from the other side, the people are not innocent kids or Boy Scouts. They are fighters, they are getting very sophisticated weapons, and they are using these weapons. Lavrov said that Russians are a lot of people on the ground. There is no proof that government used chemical weapons. Government didn't have any incentive to use chemical weapons.
All I'm asking you is, how would the rebels get their hands on chemical weapons? They don't have any.
They can get any kind of chemical weapons. By the way, Lavrov said that Russian specialists on these chemical weapons, they identified that in 19th of March, chemical weapons were used by opposition forces.
Okay,
and
so
they submitted that to Security Council, and our Western partners just ignored these facts which were submitted to Security Council.
So let's discuss some of the things you've brought up. What is wrong, or what was wrong with waiting for the UN investigation to end?
Well, the UN investigation is continuing, and there's nothing...
But the UN said that it's too little, too late. They'd already decided.
The investigation is still continuing, and it's...
But before the investigation, you already said that Bashar al-Assad used chemical weapons. Before the investigation.
Yes,
it's very funny.
Yes, no.
It's very funny.
No, what's actually very funny is that you believe and just simply repeat...
It is very funny because nobody can trust your statement that they used by Assad.
I suppose you think that Lavrov speaks the truth all the time. Is that correct?
I guess.
And in fact, what I would like to say is that the investigation is continuing, but unfortunately, while the UN investigators were trying to get access to the site...
Lavrov is not making statement before investigation finished.
The Syrian government continues...
Dr. Migranyan, I'll come to you. Let Dr. Pollock finish.
The Syrian government forces, Bashar al-Assad forces, continue to bomb and shoot.
So let's get to the point that you raised, which is
to prevent the UN from conducting the investigation. And that is why Secretary of State Kerry said that the UN investigation is too late, because the Syrian government wouldn't allow them to enter the site.
Let's get to this point, which you said, yes, they were late getting there. They also had sniper fire on their car. They had to turn back. Nobody knows who did that. This idea that Bashar al-Assad cannot single-handedly end the violence because the other side also has support. They're getting weapons, and by some accounts, they're getting militants from different countries.
Well, the fact is that the Syrian army is the only side that has tanks and airplanes and missiles and chemical weapons. And if they stop using all of those weapons, the violence will end, I promise you. So the responsibility is entirely on one side in this situation, and that is the Syrian government and armed forces.
Dr. Migranyan, once again, will Russia be willing to put any pressure on Syria, Bashar al-Assad, to end the violence?
Oh, listen, Americans must put pressure on opposition and jihadists to stop the violence. If they do that, of course, Russia is ready to put pressure to put an end to the violence, because Russia is in favor of putting an end to the violence, because Geneva I and now Geneva II is Russian initiative. That's why Russia wanted negotiated settlement, as I said. But listen, for tango you need two. You can't push Assad to stop using the force when jihadists are using the force in enormous scale.
But
that's the problem.
As was pointed out, he has a full army, tanks, air force, chemical weapons, whether he's used them or not, but missiles. An army is much stronger than resistance.
Well, listen, if army was much stronger, and if your guest is right, then this, civil war could be ended just long ago, which means opposition is very strong. Armament is supplied in a large quantity, and they are fighting up to the end, which means this is a serious, large-scale, war force which is fighting against the legitimate government. That's the situation in Syria.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you could come to our program. Dr. Migranyan, your point of view was, of course, very important. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. Let me thank both of our guests, Dr. David Pollock, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, and Dr. Andranik Migranyan, the director of the Institute for Democracy and Cooperation. And thank you for joining us. Please send us your questions or comments, or watch our past shows on our website, voanews.com/ontheline. We look forward to hearing from you and hope you'll join us again next week for another episode of On the Line.
Hi, I'm Brian Patton with VOA. I recently visited Google headquarters in California. Google, of course, is the popular internet search engine. I went there to meet with the artists and engineers who create these sometimes funny, sometimes baffling artistic renderings called Google Doodles. Check this out. Anyone who uses Google will occasionally notice a doodle, a specially designed logo to commemorate holidays like Chinese New Year, or obscure anniversaries like the date the London subway system opened 150 years ago, or a quirky tribute like this Zamboni animation depicting the machine used to resurface ice skating rinks. These artistic renderings of the Google logo may bring more users to its homepage, but Ryan Germick, the chief doodler, says their value to the company isn't found in a traditional business plan.
The existential question of why.
Why are you here?
We're here to surprise and delight our users and humanize Google.
Unlike the business side of Google that constantly analyzes data and usage, the doodles, he says, are evaluated on subjective criteria.
We look at social networks, we look at press, we look at, do we make each other laugh or smile with the thing that we're doing? And try to have more of an emotional connection rather than this is converting more clicks than the last one.
Doodler Jennifer Hom says the team creates over 300 doodles each year in many different languages, but stays away from topics that are political or controversial.
We basically think of anything that's innovative, artistic, and nerdy, something that's appropriate for Google.
She says doodle ideas can come from just about anywhere. Many, like the suggestion for an interactive rendering of a buckyball, a form of carbon composed of 60 atoms that looks like a molecule, come from inside the company.
I'd never heard of what this was, but there were like 10 to 12 people in Google who were obsessed with buckyballs.
Google's culture of innovation, the relaxed environment, the mix of work and play helps the creative process. Doodle engineer Chris Hom, no relation to Jennifer, animates artist drawings. He says he first got involved with the team as part of a program to nurture innovation and growth.
My involvement started out as a 20% project, which was kind of a phenomenon at Google where engineers get to spend 1 day a week or 20% of their time working on whatever they want. And so I was building some little animations, and someone on the Doodle team saw them and said, "Hey, why don't you come do that on the homepage?" And it's been having a blast here ever since.
These Google Doodlers say the irreverent humor of the artwork reflects that culture of innovation and the idea that Google should be a fun place to work or visit online. Brian Patton, VOA News, San Francisco.
Welcome to English in a Minute. What would you think if you heard someone say,
"I'm getting cold feet"?
Did she forget to put on her shoes? Is she standing in snow? Let's listen and see whether we can figure this out.
Are you going to enter the photo contest?
I don't know.
Oh, you should. You're so talented. Your pictures are beautiful.
You're just being nice. But I'm getting cold feet. I don't know if I'm good enough.
If you say, "I am getting cold feet," it means that you are afraid or uncomfortable about doing something. For example, people say a person is getting cold feet if he or she is supposed to get married but calls off or cancels the wedding. This is a very common informal phrase, and that's English in a Minute.
It's about 40 hours of hand saws and chisels and files and rasps and sandpaper and you know, the blood, sweat, and tears, mostly blood.
At Valid Cycles, we make custom bamboo bicycles. So frames start at $1,200, and then we can do a complete for about $3,000.
Even though I might sound a little bit biased because I built a lot of them, but we kind of look at it as functional art.
The bamboo bikes, I can throw it, crash it, drop it. It's strong stuff.
Still good. Which is really cool, considering it's something that grows all over the place. And there are some species that have a higher specific strength than steel, meaning pound for pound, per its unit of mass, it is stronger.
It kind of just takes out that fear of handling your frame like an eggshell.
And like with most wood products, you can refinish it, sand and re-clear coat, and it looks great again.
We chose iron bamboo or tan vong. It's a really thick wall bamboo. And so we've got a guy that goes over to Vietnam and he imports it into Portland. And then we get to go pick through the cream of the crop. And even out of those, then we probably use half. But it's nice because the rest of what we don't use goes into the compost pile. You know, it's not something that's going to go into a landfill like aluminum or steel.
It has just a little bit of a slight curve to it when you look at it from the side, and I like that, but I want it to be straight looking down this direction. Having your head tube in line with your seat tube and having those be at the correct angles, all of that is done by having a good jig. All the points where all the tubes come together are the lugs, and all of those are made out of carbon fiber. Carbon fiber is just string and glue. It's the same principle as like a rebar inside of concrete. You have a reinforcing material inside of a matrix that holds it in place. Some things you have to pay attention to is the skin of bamboo has a very high silica content, and so stuff doesn't really stick to it. It doesn't get a very good chemical bond. So you need to kind of take the skin off and get down to kind of the meat. We actually cut into it about 1 millimeter deep or so, and we make sure that it's not uniform in any direction, so that when we lay that carbon fiber in there, we compress it down in there, it sinks down into all those little grooves and really holds it tight. Bamboo's big enemy that we have is moisture, and one of the things that we do is put it in the oven for about 150 degrees, and then you crank it up to 250 and then 300. Yeah, you can do it in a kitchen oven. That was the first way we started doing it. It's a full week worth of work to do it, and
we're incredibly anal. I mean, we'll scour that one little nick until it's perfect.
Let's face it, we all want it to look cool. Pandas, yeah. Look out if you take your bike to the zoo.
Bye.